Hey guys, Fawad here from beatweaks.com. In this video, I want to talk about loudness. Now, I know you probably read like a million articles and watched 10 million more videos about loudness and how to make your tracks loud, but I'm sure at least some of you are still confused about the subject. So, I want to take a little bit of time in this video to talk about loudness because I was sent a track to master by a friend who is a producer, and his question was, I can't make my track loud. Why can't I make my track loud? Why isn't it working? I'm using compressors, I'm using limiters, I'm doing all the things that I'm supposed to do, and I still can't get this track to be as loud as I want it to be. So I'm just going to take you through a few things that hopefully will clear this up. So this is the file, the track that I was sent, and immediately you can see in the actual waveform itself, you can see that it's a very dynamic track. So if I zoom in here, you can see that what I mean by dynamic is that there's a big difference between the loudest peaks or the loudest things in this track and the lowest things in this track. So this difference is the dynamic range. Now, dynamic range is a good thing, because it means your track doesn't sound crushed or distorted, it sounds more natural, it sounds more punchy. But at the same time, there is such a thing as too much dynamics. There is such a thing as a track that's too dynamic. And this is an example of that. And this can make your life a little bit harder if you're trying to make your track loud. Okay, so enough of me talking. I'm going to open this free plugin that I have. And it's one of the most useful plugins in the world. It's changed my life when it comes to mixing and mastering and understanding the effects of what I'm doing in terms of compression or limiting or distorting. It's called Smexoscope. It's completely free. I will post a link to download it. Anyway, let's go to a section in the track and I'll play it. And what this plugin is going to do is it's going to read out just the waveform of whatever audio is playing. Okay, and if you click this freeze button here, it'll actually freeze the waveform. So if you were paying attention while the audio was playing, you can see that these big spikes in volume are the kick and the snare. And then this is pretty much everything else, all the synths, the bass, and all that other stuff. So like I said, the track is pretty dynamic, so the kick and the snare are really punchy, but look how loud they are in comparison to everything else. Now this can cause a problem. And here is where the problem happens. Now I have a limiter after this plugin, and what I'm going to try to do is I'm really going to try to crank up the gain on the limiter so that I can actually make my track loud. Now, the definition of loud is different for different people. It depends on where you want to release the track. It depends on if you're giving it to a record label, they might have loudness guidelines that they want you to follow. Every online platform has different normalization options. So if you upload a track to YouTube, for example, it doesn't matter how loud your track is, YouTube is going to turn the volume of that track down. It's going to normalize it to YouTube's requirements. So what ends up happening is that you've worked so hard to make a track really loud, and then if you compare it to other tracks that aren't as compressed and limited as yours, those other tracks will sound better at the same volume. So you just need to be careful about where you're sending your track to, and you might even want to do different masters depending on where you're sending out your track. So if you're sending it to a record label and you want to upload it online and you want to send it to a DJ, then maybe make 3 different masters with 3 different loudnesses, if that makes sense. Okay, so I'm going to crank up the limiter, and I'm also going to put another free plugin on here, which is Voxengo Span. And if you don't know this, you should. It's a spectrum analyzer. And the important part is it has an RMS reading. And from years of experience, a good balanced RMS, which is a good balance of loud and dynamic at the same time, is -9 dB. So what I'm going to try to do is I'm going to try to crank up my limiter and try to get to minus 9 dB in RMS and see if it's actually going to work. So you can see that I can't even get it to minus 9 dB without the track sounding horrible because of all the distortion and all the crushing that's happening from the limiter. Now let me do another quick demonstration. I'm just going to put this plugin after the limiter, and we're going to see how the waveform looks like now. So let me turn off the freeze. So the limiter is really crushing those kicks and snares. So this is the point, this is the entire point of this video. These really large peaks from the kick and the snare are going to be the first things to trigger a limiter or a compressor. And what ends up happening is that the compressor or limiter is pretty much working only to control those really loud peaks. So it's not really doing anything to make your track sound fatter or louder or better in any way. All it's doing is it's just taking those really loud kicks and snares and just pushing them down into the rest of the track. And what that's going to do is it's going to cause a lot of pumping. It's going to cause a lot of distortion. Your track is not going to sound good. And here's a perfect example of that, because I'm sure that some of you are like, oh my God, this sounds amazing, even though just because it's loud, it sounds amazing. But here is a demonstration. I'm going to keep this limiter on, really pushing that volume. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to just duplicate the track. And then on the duplicated track, I'm just going to turn off the limiter. And what I want to do is I want to volume match the track with all the limiting and the track without the limiting. So you can do this in a couple of different ways. You can just adjust the volume of the track. So all I'm going to do is I'm going to use my ears, and I'm going to reduce the volume of the track with a limiter on it to match it with the volume of just the unprocessed sound. And that way we can have an objective comparison of the two, so you can compare them at the same volume. And this goes back to the example of YouTube. So if you really crush your track with a limiter and you think it sounds amazing because it's loud, and then you upload it to YouTube, YouTube is going to turn that volume back down, and it's probably going to sound horrible in comparison with a track that wasn't killed with a limiter. So that's the whole point of this comparison. So now they're at the same volume, and listen to what happens to the kick and the snare. The kick and the snare are completely gone, no more punch at all. They don't even sound good anymore. The whole track sounds crushed. So that is the lesson of this video. If you want to make your tracks loud, but also clean and punchy at the same time, you need to take care of those really big transients and big peaks in your mix. So you need to balance things out in your mix, and you need to make sure that if you're using a lot of compression on your kicks and snares and other percussive instruments, or you're using things like transient, like a plugin that enhances the transient and increases the attack of instruments, you need to be careful, because that means that those percussive hits like kicks and snares and hats and all that other stuff are going to be so much louder than everything else. And then when you try to master and make your entire track loud, those things are going to be the only things triggering your compressors and your limiter, and you won't be able to make your track sound loud and good at the same time. So you need to control those really big transients, and the best place to do that is actually in your mix. So when you're mixing, make sure that if you have those really large peaks, take care of them. Take care of them with compression, take care of them with distortion, because distortion also chops off really big transients and peaks. And you can even use limiters in your mix as well to control those really big peaks in your kicks and snares and other drums and percussion instruments. So that is a lesson in loudness, and I really hope you found it useful.